Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, and welcome back to the Wade Borth podcast. Today, I have a gentleman from down under. He's actually making a long distance phone call today, Jackson Millan. Am I pronouncing the last name correctly, Jackson? So Jackson he lives in Australia. He told me he's in Queensland. I think that's correct. I'm not sure that I know enough about Australia to be even having a coaching conversation. I'm familiar with that on the map, and I know it's a big island, and it looks like they relax and they have a lot of fun down there. So welcome, Jackson. Thanks for sharing some time with me. I appreciate it.
I'm looking forward to having a chat.
You bet. So just a little bit more of an introduction. Jackson is also known as the wealth mentor. Interesting words that you use there. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that. And he spent the last decade shaking up the wealth industry. He's a co-founder and CEO of Aureus Financial. Excuse me if I don't pronounce that quite right. And he's a best-selling author and a host of the podcast, Enjoy the Journey. So welcome. Appreciate you taking your time, Jackson. And maybe we can start off with just give me a little bit of a commercial about your podcast and the books you've written. I'm curious to hear a little bit more about you.
Yes, I've been involved in the wealth space for coming on 15 years now. I started in this space straight out of high school because I wanted to help people like my parents. And through my entire childhood, I watched them struggle. I watched them work incredibly hard, work themselves to the bone to have very little to show for it. And this was allowing them to survive. It wasn't providing them with surplus means to thrive. And although they tried to teach me good values, it was all from a theoretical standpoint, and they really weren't practicing what they were preaching. And for that reason, early on, realized that there was a disconnect between them working for money. Now, I started training to become a financial advisor originally. And what I come to realize is that advisors in Australia really fell into one of two buckets. So I very quickly decided to bin the term financial advisor, and I created the term wealth coach. And essentially, my mission has been to help my clients understand the language of money. And we've been very fortunate to be able to help over 1,000 clients, wrote some books and done some cool stuff along the way.
And you have a podcast of your own, correct? Enjoy the Journey?
So many people acknowledge and talk about the destination, the outcomes that they've achieved. And very few people really talk a lot about the journey, the good things, the bad things. So my whole philosophy is around sharing those journeys to inspire people to rise to the next level.
That's fabulous, because I think you're right. There's a lot of people that live in the absolute now. So one of my founding principles, and I have four I'll share with you real quick, but one of them is that long-term thought process, right? So there's very few, well, I have no clients that don't have at least somewhat of a long-term view of where they want to be to, where they want to get to, right? I think that's where people have to start. And then then there are some people that just have a very short-term view, right? They're not enjoying the journey, they're struggling, and the reason why they struggle is because they don't have a destination where they want to get to, right? So they're drifting. And I have a good friend of mine that always says, he says quite often, he says, you can't get to a destination by drifting.
Exactly.
And you find that people that are more successful, the happier people are those that have a destination and are willing to lay out a plan to get there. And when you do that, you actually now have an opportunity to enjoy the journey. I don't know if that's kind of been your experience as well.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think there's people fall into a couple of buckets when it comes to defining the destination. They focus on one goal at a time, and what ultimately happens is another conflicting goal comes out of the periphery and requires them to make a scarcity-based decision. And then the other part is that people chase superficial, more like dreams. They don't know exactly how they're going to get there. They've just got some vague North Star in the distance that they refer to from time to time. We need to be able to map out all of our goals. We need to be able to reverse engineer that into actionable KPIs and metrics. And then we need to be able to on-track manage ourselves to that plan over time so we can course correct. Because this is, and as you know, Wade, there's no such thing as perfection. It's all about the progress towards the greater plan and understanding whether you're on track or off track.
Yeah, I think, when it comes I think that's a great point you make, is that so many people get discouraged because they think they have to be perfect. And they miss the old adage that, I had a carpenter friend of mine that says, don't let perfect get in the way of getting it done.
Yeah.
Right. And we have to remind ourselves that there was just one perfect person in this world. And look what happened to him, right? They crucified him. So don't let perfect get in the way of getting it done. I think is a real great adage, because it is the journey, right? It's so powerful for you to say that, because it's, as we think through what we can do, and here at Sage Wealth Strategy, I have a very strong belief that My job is to be, to be your guide along that journey, right? So I'm here to help you because it is hard to get from this point to that mountain peak without some assistance. And some people can do it,
You're
and that's
exactly right.
fine. That's fabulous. That's great. But more than likely, we all need help. We all should find our special purpose, that special sauce that we have in life. And that's what I try to share with people. It's like, let me help you guide through that journey down the pathway. So I love what you're saying is that we have this journey that that we're going to make one way or the other, right? We're going to walk down that journey, and you might as well make it enjoyable. You might as well have a destination at the end in mind.
Exactly. And look, I refer to this way as money muscle memory that separates people who are immensely successful with money and wealth and those who are not, as opposed to procrastinating and waiting for the perfect opportunity or the perfect time or the perfect investment. We end up, as we go through our journey, because we do procrastinate, feel like we're falling behind, we feel like we're missing out. And then when they go and try and lift it, they become disheartened because they either can't do it or they hurt themselves or they do something wrong. And
Yeah.
what we need to do, and the idea of a good guide, we create a repetitive framework that allows us to build that money muscle memory over time. It's about helping our clients rise to that higher standard. Because another analogy that I really like to use, Wade, and if anybody who's listening to this, I want you to squeeze your fist. All right. Now squeeze it harder.
Mm.
A bit more juice in that tank, right? Like, why didn't you squeeze it that hard the first time? It's because your subconscious limitations told you it was as hard as you can squeeze. And it was only once prompted the hand a little bit harder. And this is what a good guide of what yourself and I do, Wade, is it's about making sure that we squeeze that last bit of juice and help get our clients to that higher standard.
Yeah. Just from that same standpoint, people really, well, let me take it back. I was just recently at a conference for Infinite Banking or Infinite Banking think tank. It's a user group. I don't know if you're familiar with it or not,
No,
but
I'm not.
we've talked about that out there. But it's around the gentleman that wrote the book, Becoming Your Own Banker. It was R. Nelson Nash. Is kind of what he brought people in. So anyhow, we were down there, and there was a speaker on the last day. It was the second to last platform. He got up there and he says, "Man, this has been a fabulous 2 days." He said, "But all this information you've heard, everything you've seen, is absolutely useless unless you put it into action." And he had because the whole audience was like, "What?" They're almost insulted until he put that last little bit on there. Unless you put it into action, right? So, and action can be the smallest steps, right? And going back to your analogy of lifting weights, it's how do we make changes in our lives? We typically don't make changes unless we have some emotional issue that happens in our life,
Correct.
or we have spaced repetition matched with elite level coaching. And I think a lot of people we've been conditioned to think that, hey, we can do all this information is on the internet. We can do it all ourselves. But the problem is that, I told you one of my first founding principles is this fact that you have to be a long-term thinker. The second one is that God's given us all the knowledge that we already need to know. It's already within us, or, we know it already. But the problem is it's like my garden out here. It could be overrun by weeds, which is noise and distraction and all the other stuff. And my job is to help go, out there. And I'm a farm boy from North Dakota. So this is my analogy. This is what I use.
I love it.
I have to go out there and I have to hack down the weeds and help you cultivate the crop that you want to grow. And that doesn't happen overnight because weeds grow a whole lot faster than my tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
And so my job is to help you do that and grow the crop that you want to grow.
I don't come from a farming background. I'm out of my depth and I've been learning as I've been here. Here's the thing. Here's another great metaphor for wealth. We're in a tropical environment where weeds just grow like wildfire. Weeds are just a symptom for something wrong with the system. And it was through using that as an indicator to go with the flow as opposed to against it that we've been able to create a great system that fuels and feeds itself. Now, I see the exact same issues happening when people with their wealth. They do things that are against the grain. And there are only certain types of human beings that can persevere against the grain for extended periods of time. They can just have that sheer grit. They fall off the wagon. So what we need to do is that naturally results in your default result being action, by a guy called BJ Fogg, called Tiny Habits. Have you come across it, Wade?
I have heard of it. I've not read it though. I'm familiar with it though.
It's fantastic. I had the pleasure of hearing BJ speak and his sister speak as well. And it was just mind blowing because I struggle with this a lot myself. And what he talks about is that there's basically a matrix. On one side of the matrix, how motivated are you by a particular task or action? And then on the other axis of the matrix, we've got perceived difficulty. However, when the inverse is true, where you see something as being incredibly difficult and you've got low motivation, it is almost guaranteed that you will do nothing. You set up your finances, motivation and intrinsic drive, and to reduce friction and difficulty. And if we do that, we can make sure that we go with the flow and we've always got action taking place.
Yeah, that's great insight. I mean, it seems so self-evident, right? I mean, things are hard and you have a little motivation to do it, right? So why go do it, right? It just seems
Exactly.
But I think where like my special sauce comes into play and what I'm good at is, my desire is to be a mentor for people. I don't want to be a gatekeeper. I don't want to be a person that,
Yeah.
when Nelson wrote his book, he said, becoming your own banker. He didn't say Wade becoming your banker, right?
Yes.
And so I followed that philosophy in the sense that I want to mentor you to make things easier. And one of the things that we try to do, obviously, which is has always been the focus of my podcast. Like, well, if you control the banking function in your life, then everything else becomes a lot easier, right? You want to start a business, but you don't want to go through a bank application, 40 pages long and 14 people to give your proctology exam. Hey, then we made it easier, and we reduce that friction, right?
Yes.
Right. That's the whole idea. So I love that idea that you bring out, is that you can reduce that friction, get people's motivation higher, the benefit higher, and we can reduce the friction, and then they'll take action, and then those barriers are out of their way.
And the great part about this, Wade, and the thing that I love about what you do as well, is that they're constantly faced with financial adversity. I want to go buy an investment property. I'm just another number. Hey, sorry, your finances and your finance stack up. Computer says no. Oh, shit. And this just happens time and time again. People lack the education of the system. The system has written the rules. The system's been around for hundreds of years now. And if we go back to non-traditional systems, thousands of years, it's like going and playing a game of blackjack. It's gambling. It really is. Then they actually increasing their chances of winning. The only difference being that when you're at the casino, the house always has the odds. Whereas when you can understand the rules of finance, the odds in your favor.
Yeah. And then again, you make a great point, controlling as much as you can control, right? Having you be the one that's responsible. I've asked this question of a lot of business owners. They said the fact that if you go to a bank and they can give you a thumbs up or thumbs down, if you can do a deal or expand your business or do whatever, who's truly ever in control?
Bank.
The bank, right? You're not in control.
No.
So that's great stuff, because I mean, we're right on the same page, shows you what you can do over the Great Pacific Ocean, right? We can be on the same page.
Exactly right, mate.
So tell me a little bit about what lifestyle business is. It says, that one of the things that you had in your bio is about lifestyle business. And we could talk a lot more about just controlling the financing, but I'm guessing that lifestyle business feeds right into the same thing. It's the same thought process, because again, I'm all about process over profit. Because if we don't understand, it's like a good carpenter, right? I could be the worst carpenter in the world and have the greatest set of tools, I'm still going to make crappy furniture. Right?
100%. Yeah.
You can let's pick on Tiger Woods. As bad a shape as Tiger Woods was at the Masters, his health wise, and he could take my crappy clubs and I could take his fabulous clubs. He's still going to beat me, 99.999% of the time out of 100, right? So he's always going to beat me, because it's a swing, it's this process. It's not the clubs, it's not the tools that we're using, because it's all between the ears. It's the mindset. And so I'm guessing that the lifestyle business is right there.
It really is. Yeah. It's a catalyst for shifting entrepreneurial mindset. And we only work with service-based business owners. They reinvest in their business. That is often an excuse for poor money mismanagement. Scary statistic is that less than 10% of businesses are ever sold for a profit, if they're ever sold at all. And the vast majority of small business owners globally are paid less per hour than their equivalent that they would get with their skill set and expertise. So what we aim to do for our clients is we want them to build that achieves 4 things. This is not profit on paper, not hypothetical profit. This is real. Second thing, we want to make a week in our business, allowing us to have a 3-day weekend in every single week. Third thing, we want to be able to work 44 weeks a year. So you have the freedom and flexibility to take 2 weeks off every quarter to recharge your business and to be able to consistently run the marathon, no longer at a sprint pace. Using your business profits to fast track your way to $4 million in net wealth. Now, I don't just have a love affair with the number 4. If we look at the quality of lifestyle, any more income above 400,000, quality of your life diminishes. Like, you don't necessarily have an increased quality of experience. Sure, there are some people out there that want to drive a Ferrari and want to live in a beachfront mansion, but for the vast majority, $400,000 a year allows them to live an amazing lifestyle, a substantial amount of surplus that they can build wealth with. The 4 days a week, if you can work 4 days a week and 44 weeks a year, you can continue to run in perpetuity, because I have no intention to retire. I love what I do, but I want to be able to do it at a pace that allows me to put myself first, my health first, my lifestyle first. Net wealth should produce around $200,000 a year in passive income. Wealth should last in perpetuity, where you should not erode it, because so many people, and I'm sure you've seen this, Wade, what our parents did is they built wealth with a diminished value, meaning that they were banking their wealth was going to last up until life expectancy, and they lived a minute long, they'd be broke. And that doesn't sound like any fun to me.
Yeah, that's the consumer mindset. I call that the consumer mindset, right? We're
Exactly.
taught, we're conditioned to think, and it's a big problem, this conditioned thinking, but we're conditioned to think that we have to consume our wealth. So like you said, so the day we die, what's the old adage is, I want my check to the undertaker to bounce type of thing. Oh, but that's what we've been conditioned to think, right? Versus
Exactly.
the other way around. If we, it goes back to Kiyosaki's, the BI triangle, right? We want to be in those quadrants, the cash flow quadrants, if we're talking about that, which if the listeners on here haven't read that, I think that's one of Robert's best books, quite frankly, is the cash flow quadrants. But we got to get out of this consumer mindset or this employee mindset and move more to a business, not a self-employed person, because again, that's probably the worst of all the worlds, just like you said, but come into the fact that we got to run a business, or we have investments that give us that passive cash flow, because that's truly where you find your freedom.
Exactly.
And once you find that freedom, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
The key thing is here, look, I'm not saying this from a top of I've been on a trajectory where I was going bankrupt because of my father getting sick, having to inherit all of the household mortgage and putting food on the table all at the same time. And I was nearly at the verge of hitting that big red reset button. If I understand these principles and these rules, I can earn myself out of any situation. I've been able to build a $6 million business with a team of 25, and I've been able to create financial freedom at 33. And it's because I've understood these, create a plan and reverse engineer it into milestones. I've been able to systematically create, turning my business profits into personal wealth. And I've been able to manage my money to allow it to continue to nurture. And if you can manage, plan, you are truly a steward of creating financial freedom for you and your family.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think it was Mark Twain said, the biggest obstacle to success, and I'm paraphrasing because I'm terrible about the actual quote, but he says, isn't the lack of knowledge, is the illusion of knowledge, right?
Yes.
And I was reading, one of the things you talk about is, 3 deadly problems sucking the lifeblood from our businesses. Maybe explain that a little bit, because that actually had me pretty intrigued, because I think that's right along the same line what we talk about. And part of that is the conditioned thinking, what we're supposed to, quote, well, these are what the experts are telling us to do, and this is what we're supposed to do, versus what we want to do and what we know is right. If we know what's going on, we'll know what to do. But most people don't have a clue what's going on.
And I think the big problem here is that entrepreneurs mistake their business for the destination because they've poured so much blood, sweat, and tears into it. What should be the best wealth creation vehicle that you can ever have has now been turned into a blood-sucking monster that is now reliant on your life. Now, we call the principles of getting your business and turning it into a wealth creation machine requires 3 things. Premium profit comes from positioning in the marketplace, of making sure that you can make an apples for oranges comparison, or even better, an apple juice for apples comparison, because there will always be somebody who is more than happy to convenience of freshly squeezed, cold pressed apple juice than the commodity of apples. The second thing is pricing and packaging. The number 1 problem for most entrepreneurs is that they do not place enough value on themselves and their products and services. And it's because they haven't packaged it well enough. And then the third part is profit and loss intelligence. Most business owners are flying completely chasing vanity metrics, no idea that the levers they can, sensitivity of those levers in order to grow and scale their profitability in any economic climate.
I kind of chuckled and laughed a little bit, because what you're saying, now let's get, you deal just mostly with service businesses, right? Is that fair to say? So, but what you're saying is exactly what we teach, right? So this whole idea of, if I have a business, why wouldn't I want that business, in my case, what we talk about is your family financing system, to be as profitable as any other business you have, right? Don't give it away, right? And we call this economic value added. I don't know if you're familiar with that terminology, but that's exactly what you're talking about. Making sure that when you run a business, if it's your business, whatever it is, that it's as valuable as it possibly can be versus, I think that was your second point, right? And maybe just expand on that a little bit if you wouldn't mind.
The golden ticket for most business owners is that they're going to scale up their business and they're one day going to sell it and they're going to sail off to the Bahamas and drink rum out of a cup. And
Yeah.
the problem is, what would a buyer be looking for if they were going to acquire your business? And a buyer does not want to buy a job for themselves. So if you're a solo operator, you're self-employed, you're basically imprisoned by your business. A buyer wants to be an investor. They want passive income, typically, right? They want the opportunity for upside, but no one's going to pay you a premium in your business. They're going to manufacture that themselves. The objective should be to treat your business as if it has zero value, cash creation machine. Maximize its cash flow and profitability, because the more profitable your effort from your income, the less work you have to put involved to produce that cash flow business is. Because the most valuable business is one that produces you so much cash flow that you don't even want to sell it anymore.
Right. That was gonna be my point. If we get to that point, why would we want to sell it? Right.
Exactly right. And these businesses that last years, right? These really wealthy generational families, the names that we all know of, the Rockefellers and all of these names, the reason why they're able to create this generational wealth is that they are now no longer operating, they are now stewards of the wealth. They have agents that they have employed that sit in the seats and run the wheels of the machine to produce the cash without the need for them to be actively involved.
And that's a great point but that doesn't happen to everybody though, right? I mean, there are the Vanderbilts, right? And then there's the Rockefellers. It's two great, they're divergent stories, right? One had a plan, one had a process. It wasn't a product driven, it was a process driven system for the Rockefellers. And the Vanderbilts, they didn't have a process. They didn't have a family plan, as it were. And so they didn't have they have a legacy name, but they don't have any legacy money that goes along with it
No,
because
they
all
don't.
their money was made in the early 1800s.
And look, the big problem there, and I've just written my latest book that's called The Family Vault, and it's about helping entrepreneurs create true generational without having to use a family office. And the idea here, the big fundamental flaw of the Vanderbilt family is they had the money, invest time in passing over the values. There was no values. The head of the Vanderbilt, the head of the Vanderbilt family and he wasn't present. He was so busy making money, running his business and being, to be fair, an arrogant prick. And that there was so much spite and hate that most of his heirs' fortune just blew the money out of, and this is the problem. This is where the fundamental principle of shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves comes from, is that the first generation makes it. And because they're so busy making it, they don't invest the time in passing the values into the second generation. So then they spend it lottery. The vast majority of lottery are worse off as a result. It's exactly the same with an inheritance. So unless we can build this operating system, we create a family constitution and we teach the next generation to be stewards of wealth and help them understand how are they ever going to stand a chance of nurturing that money to ensure that they can set the next generations up for success because they're not invested.
Yeah, 100% agree. That's, one of my favorite shows here is, How the Lottery Ruined My Life. I don't know if you've seen it. It's a TV show. But it's so true because it's, money is just a tool. It's just something that we use for exchange of goods and services, right? It's a medium. The knowledge, how we use it, is the real wealth, right? So that's the understanding. I think that's exactly what you were talking about. So unless we're passing along that knowledge and that understanding and we have a pathway laid out for somebody that they can follow, or at least a guidebook, right? An outline of anything, whatever you want to call it, a map. If we're talking about going from this peak to that peak, you need to have a map. But a lot of people think, well, the next generation, they'll get it and we're too busy making money that we're working so damn hard that we forget that the most important thing is passing that knowledge and information and along with the money into the next generation, and then making sure that they have the same plan in place as well.
And look, the problem is that, and I heard this on Joe Rogan's podcast, but he said, tough men make easy times, weak men make hard times. With most of us who are self-made, we're battlers. We have gone through adversity. We know what it is like, fuels us to create and amass this wealth. But because we don't necessarily invest in money passing over those hard-working, battling values to the next generation, they can create complacency. They can often have that silver spoon in their mouth, and then it ends up becoming this vicious cycle. So the thing that I'm really passionate about, Wade, is how do we not necessarily just say, hey, so you've got to do it tough and bully yourself if you want to be a resilient and tough person, but how do we synthetically these values, these hard-working values, to make sure that future generations can choose the real problems that are going to lead to the continuance of our race for hopefully thousands and thousands of years. Because the big problem is that humans have to choose an occupation because of the sheer need to put food on the table. Then we are never going to prioritize solving the real problems in this world. My view is that we give future generations the complete abundance of opportunity to do the passions that are going to lead to the continuance of our race. That's what's
Abundance of opportunity. That's fabulous. I think that's about as well said as you can put it, because again, without opportunity, all the other stuff really is meaningless, right? Because we have to, and again, giving them the abundance of opportunity to work in whatever it is that is their God-given calling, right? Their highest and best form of themselves, whatever that could be. That's what you want to be that's what you want people working in.
exactly.
So many people, I was having a conversation with a friend of mine today, and he was talking about his in-laws, and they all hate their jobs. They all hate their managers. And I'm like, they need to find something that they're passionate about and not work because they have to.
100%.
You have to have something. So I love what you're saying there. So.
Yeah, at that point, the killer of dreams is the problem is that so many people inherit all of these abilities. And for that reason, there is far too much at stake for them to risk going out on a whim to chase their dreams. And if we can alleviate that problem, then we can get people truly solving these real world problems.
So if you had a magic wand, you could say, here's 2 things that you need to go out and do, right? Do today. What would those 2 things be to get people, again, it's not like you have to do it all at once, but what would be like the first 2 things you would say, here's the first 2 things that you need to do?
Yeah. The first thing is stop chasing the best vehicle before you define the destination. I get asked this question. I'm sure you get it all of the time. Like, what should I be investing in? Share market? Should I be investing in property? Should I be putting money into a whole of life policy, this and that? Well, it's like saying, hey, it's like going to a travel agent and say, hey, look, plane, or should I take a boat? Or I heard it's nice to drive this time of year. What are they going to ask you? Spend as much time as you can defining your destination. And there's 3 questions you can ask yourself. What is fundamentally important? So what are your non-negotiables? When your non-negotiables have been achieved, what becomes your goals, dreams, and aspirations? And then what is the significance of those goals? Diarize asking yourself those 3 questions every quarter, and you're going to get more clarity around the destination than you've ever had in your life. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is understand the levers that you can control that are going to get you from where you are to where you need to go. Because the reality is none of us can influence what the share market does, what inflation does. It's important that we understand these things, but what we need to do is we need to get the odds in our favor by controlling the things that we can actually influence. What you can influence is your cash flow, how much you choose to contribute, how you work out whether you are on track or off track for your plan, and work out what is the gap that you need to cause. Focus on that and just accept the macro environment. You're going to feel far more in control of your wealth journey than you ever have.
So yeah, get clear on where you want to go and take as much control as you possibly can in your own hands to simplify it for a simple farm boy like this in North Dakota. So real quick, if people want to see more about you, where would they find information? Just, if you had a website that you have people look at to hear more about what you have to say. I love your message, by the way. I'm a very much an abundance mindset. I think the more guys like you and I are having conversation on podcasts, the more we're getting our message out to everybody that's willing to listen to us, so much bigger the pot's going to be of abundance, right? So I'm just a firm believer. Try to spread that word every day. Is like the more, let's just grow the pie bigger instead of think of scarcity. And once we can get people out of that scarcity mindset, man, we're going to free a lot of people.
I agree, mate. So if people want to find out more, feel free to look me up on social media. So search for Jackson Millan on Facebook, add me as a friend. We've got a stack of great resources. There's a link in the show notes to our gift page. We put 40-point financial performance scorecard that basically helps you work out how you're tracking towards financial freedom. Done this with tens of thousands of business owners the world around, and the average score is about 18 out of 40, which means most business owners are below average financially. It'll take you 5 minutes to do. I don't care if your score is 5 or if it's 35. I want you to do it and work out what are the things that you've answered no to that you believe you can turn into a yes over the next 30, 60, 90 days. So that page is book-mentor.com.au/gift-page. We'll include a link in the show notes, I'm sure, Wade, so people can, otherwise, if you find social media, there will be a link in my bio as well.
Right. So it's Jackson Millan, Millan, correct?
That's it.
Right. Jackson Millian. I'm excited. I'm interested. I'm going to go through that. I'm actually going to grab that and see how I do. I'd love to get you back because I think there's so much more we can talk about just from the standpoint of abundance mindset and prosperity mindset over, how that can defeat the scarcity mindset that people have. And again, I think a lot of it is just through conditioned thinking that people are there. And the reason why that is because that way, those that have the wealth or the control in the world right now can continue to control people that are scarcity mindset, right? So if you're worried about your paycheck, you're not worried about being the best, the highest form of who you. And I think there's a reason why they try to keep us scared and try to keep us believing that we're not worth investing in ourselves in. So again, it all starts with you. It all starts with me, and in all the listeners, it all starts with you first. But check Jackson's stuff out. I'm super excited to go on your website and go through that evaluation. I want to see where I land. So look forward to visiting with you again if we can. And I think it's exciting to hear your message because it's not just across the street. It's not across the state line. It's not just across the country. It's across the world that we're getting this message out of abundance and growing ourselves. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure, mate.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.